Jax's Revenge Domain. The email that changed everything hit my inbox at 7:03 a.m. with a subject line that made my coffee taste like dirt. 2025 compensation alignment. Tiered sustainability. Focus. By 8:57 a.m. that same morning, I'd uploaded one slide that cost them everything they thought they'd saved. But let me back up. Name's Rick Patterson, 48 years old. For 15 years, I'd been the guy keeping Hartwell Financial Group from stepping on financial landmines. Senior Asset Risk Director, fancy title for the person who reads the fine print while everyone else shakes hands and pops champagne. The night before the email, I was still at the office at midnight. Not because I'm some workaholic, but because legal was pinging us about clause exposure on a deal that should have been wrapped up weeks ago. The CFO's voice cut through the glass wall of his corner office like he was announcing the apocalypse. Why is legal still asking questions about this? I thought we cleared everything. I didn't look up from my screen, just kept scrolling through the covenant audit logs I'd been reviewing for the past hour. My security badge still hung from my belt, half forgotten after Finance's little New Year surprise that morning. That building at night, it's a different world. Just me, a busted coffee machine that's been broken since Obama was president, and the steady hum of servers backing up all our debt structures. Every risk flag, every protective clause, every financial skeleton we'd stuffed into offshore shell companies over the years. I knew them all like old scars because I'd put most of them there. Not as traps, understand, as lifeboats. Problem is, lifeboats only work if you remember where you parked them. For 15 years, I'd lived in the footnotes of their fancy presentations. Senior Asset Risk Director sounds impressive until you realize it means you're never on the opening slide, never mentioned at earnings calls, never invited to the victory dinners. But when some forgotten clause was about to blow up a merger, guess who got the midnight phone calls? Rick, can you check something for us? Always after the fact. Always a little desperate. Always assuming I'd drop everything to save their bacon. And I always did. Until January 2nd. That's when Finance pushed out their discipline realignment memo. You know corporate speak. They never just say what they mean. This was code for we're freezing your salary because you saved us too much money too quietly. Here's the kicker. One name was listed directly in that memo. Mine. Everyone else got vague department-level warnings about expectations alignment and performance optimization. But me? I got called out by name. Senior Asset Risk Director flagged for inconsistent deal expectations. Inconsistent. That word still makes my blood pressure spike. The inconsistency they were talking about happened just before Christmas. There was this biotech deal, $14 million credit facility that had Finance practically dancing in the hallways. They'd put together slide decks about emerging market verticals and strategic pharmaceutical partnerships. Real pretty stuff. Problem was, I actually read the paperwork. Not just the executive summary, the real paperwork. SEC Form 10Q filings, footnotes, the boring stuff nobody else wanted to touch. And buried in there, I found something that made my stomach drop. The biotech partner was under federal investigation for reporting irregularities. Not the kind of thing that makes headlines, but the kind that makes regulators very interested in who you do business with. I flagged it. Finance pushed back hard. It's just an inquiry, Rick, nothing material. The CEO called me overcautious. Legal backed me reluctantly, probably because they didn't want their names on anything if it went sideways. I held firm, blocked the deal. 3 weeks later, that biotech company's stock dropped 72% in a single day when the investigation went public. Had Hartwell signed that credit facility, we'd have been listed as a major counterparty in every news story about the scandal. Instead, nothing. No exposure, no emergency board meetings, no PR crisis management, just silence like it never happened. You'd think saving the company from that kind of disaster would earn you a thank you. Maybe a bonus. At minimum, job security. Instead, I got a salary freeze and a memo telling me my expectations were inconsistent with company vision. I read that memo 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it. Hell, I could smell the passive-aggressive tone from across the building. I read it because I needed to feel every word burn into my memory. Then I closed the PDF. Didn't respond. Didn't schedule a meeting with HR to discuss my concerns. Didn't even tell my team what was happening. They were already buried under 2 acquisitions and a client sell-off. Last thing they needed was to worry about whether their boss was about to get shown the door. Instead, I did something else. I opened my private files, the ones I kept backed up on encrypted drives that IT didn't know existed. 5 years of asset mappings, entity exposure paths, trigger thresholds, cross-default relationships between every subsidiary, shell company, and holding corporation in our network. Each document was audited, notarized, and because I'd learned never to trust anyone above my pay grade, privately watermarked with digital signatures that proved I'd written them. At the time, I wasn't thinking about revenge, I was thinking about insurance. Because here's the thing about financial networks. They're not built like brick walls, they're built like spider webs. Everything connected to everything else. One thread snaps, and if you don't know which ones to reinforce, the whole thing comes apart. I'd spent 15 years making sure Hartwell's web stayed strong, but I'd also made sure I knew exactly where every weak point was. I didn't run a dramatic security scan that night or start plotting some elaborate takedown. I just did what I always did, my job. But this time, I did it knowing they'd already decided I was disposable. I ran a quiet diagnostic check on our current exposure levels. Nothing flashy, just a routine scan to see where we stood. 3 issues popped up immediately. Minor stuff on the surface, but when you know how these things connect, minor problems have a way of becoming major disasters. First flag, a shell company called HW Holdings 57 that had been created the previous March. Registered quietly in Delaware, nothing unusual there. But it was linked to a 2019 cross-collateral clause, one I'd personally written after the Dean bond collapse nearly took us under. Same clause that had just mysteriously disappeared from the latest board presentations. Second flag, a debt servicing delay. 42 days behind schedule, which normally wouldn't raise eyebrows. Companies miss payment deadlines all the time. But this particular delay was tied to our vendor payment system, and that system was connected to our quarterly performance requirements. If the bridge loan defaulted, it would trigger a cascade effect across multiple subsidiaries. Third flag, an intercompany transfer delay between our Hong Kong and Dublin operations. Again, delays happen. But this one meant someone upstream was either moving money late or not moving it at all, hoping nobody would notice the gap in the quarterly reports. Individually, these were paperwork problems. Together, they were a loaded gun. I documented everything, timestamped it, and uploaded a clean diagnostic report to our internal risk archive. Then I did something else. I pulled up the full asset interlock schedule, the master document that showed how every piece of our financial network connected to every other piece. 5 years of careful mapping, cross-default triggers, subsidiary relationships, bond obligations, all the invisible wiring that kept Hartwell's debt structure from collapsing like a house of cards. I uploaded a read-only version to the company's global audit folder, not to overwrite anything or set off any alarms, just to make sure it existed in the system, time-stamped and authenticated. Then I encrypted the original file under my private security key and archived it to an external drive, not to steal anything or prepare for some corporate espionage scheme, just to remember. Because in 15 years of building these protection systems, I'd learned one thing. The people who benefit from your work are usually the first ones to forget you built it. I packed up that night like it was any other night. Laptop, charger, a few personal files on a zip drive, nothing dramatic. I logged out of my system at 9:42 p.m. and walked to the elevator. Most of the building was already dark. My team had gone home hours earlier, probably assuming I was just pulling another late night to stay on top of things. They had no idea their boss had just been marked for removal. I didn't slam doors or leave angry notes. Just rode the elevator down to the parking garage and drove home to my apartment, where I'd been living alone since the divorce 2 years earlier. My daughter Sarah was finishing her sophomore year at Northwestern, psychology major, dean's list, everything I'd hoped for when I started saving for her college fund 18 years ago. My son Jake was a junior in high school, already talking about engineering programs. Both kids lived with their mother in the suburbs. I got them every other weekend and Wednesday dinners when my schedule allowed, which, thanks to Hartwell's constant crisis management, wasn't as often as any of us wanted. The divorce hadn't been ugly, just inevitable. 15 years of 60-hour weeks and midnight emergencies had worn down even the most understanding spouse. Lisa had been patient longer than I deserved, but eventually patience runs out. We stayed friendly for the kids' sake, but I knew the long hours at Hartwell had cost me more than just my marriage. Now, it looked like those same long hours were about to cost me my career. The next morning, I got to the office early like always. Grabbed coffee from the place across the street because our office machine had been broken for months and nobody seemed interested in fixing it. Checked my email while standing in line, just routine stuff. Nothing about the memo that was about to blow up my day. It wasn't until 7:03 a.m. that my phone buzzed with the notification that changed everything. Internal memo. All staff. 2025 compensation alignment. I almost deleted it without reading. We got these corporate announcements all the time, usually just HR reminding everyone about policy updates or new diversity training requirements. But something about the subject line made me open it. 8 paragraphs of corporate speak. Refocus initiatives, adaptive performance metrics, sustainability alignment. The kind of language that says everything and nothing at the same time. But buried in paragraph 6 was the line that made my blood run cold. Due to inconsistent expectations and impact delivery variance, Senior Asset Risk Director compensation will be frozen until further notice. Not certain personnel, not performance review pending, my actual title, my actual job. Called out specifically while everyone else got generic warnings about departmental optimization. I read it again to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Nope. There it was. Rick Patterson, 15-year veteran, the guy who'd just saved them from a multi-million-dollar scandal, was being publicly disciplined for doing his job too well. I stood there on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop, holding my phone like it might suddenly apologize and take it all back. People pushed past me on their way to work, everyone rushing to start another day at jobs where they probably didn't get stabbed in the back for being competent. That's when I knew they'd made their first mistake. They thought they could embarrass me into quitting quietly. They were about to learn why that was a very bad assumption. I got to my desk that morning with my head spinning. 15 years of loyalty, and they repaid it with a public execution disguised as corporate policy. I sat down, opened my computer, and tried to focus on the quarterly risk assessments that were due by noon. But my mind kept drifting back to that memo. Around 9:30, Jennifer Roberts from finance stopped by my cubicle. Jen had always been straight with me, never played the corporate games that seemed to consume everyone else in management. "Hey, Rick," she said, trying to sound casual. "I guess you saw the compensation memo this morning." I looked up from my monitor. Hard to miss. "Listen, I just want you to know it wasn't my call. The decision came from way above my pay grade. I appreciate that, Jen. But here's what I don't understand. They froze my salary for doing exactly what they pay me to do." She shifted uncomfortably. "Look, between you and me, there were some concerns about the biotech deal. Some people felt you were being too conservative." Too conservative? I almost laughed. That company lost 3/4 of its value in 3 weeks. If we'd signed that credit facility, we'd be front-page news right now for all the wrong reasons. I know that, you know that, but apparently saving the company $2.8 million doesn't count as much as it should. After she left, I sat there staring at my screen, trying to process what had just happened. They weren't just freezing my salary, they were sending a message to the entire company. This is what happens when you question management decisions, even when you're right. That's when I remembered something that made my stomach drop. About a week earlier, I'd gotten a late-night email thread that I wasn't supposed to see. Someone in Treasury had accidentally copied me on a discussion about the Q1 board presentation. Nothing unusual there. I got copied on lots of financial discussions by mistake, but this thread was different. They were talking about streamlining legacy protection clauses and reducing compliance overhead, corporate speak for cutting the safety nets I'd spent years building. I'd deleted the email without thinking much about it at the time. Figured it was just another efficiency initiative that would die in committee like most of these things do. Now I wasn't so sure. I dug through my deleted items and found the thread. Sure enough, there it was. Daniel Morrison, the CFO, talking about outdated risk protocols and unnecessary complexity in our debt structures. My blood ran cold when I read the next part. We should be able to simplify the cross-default language before the board review. Most of those clauses haven't been triggered in years anyway. The cross-default language, the protection system I'd designed after the 2019 Dean bond collapse that nearly bankrupted half the investment firms on Wall Street. The system that automatically locked down our subsidiaries if any one of them hit financial trouble. They were planning to gut it. I pulled up the current board presentation draft from the shared drive, clicked through to slide 14, Covenant Health Overview, and there it was, or rather there it wasn't. Where clause 7.4c should have been, the automatic protection trigger I'd written in my own blood and sweat. There was now just generic language about pursuing commercially reasonable remedies in the event of creditor distress. Commercially reasonable. That phrase made me want to put my fist through the monitor. The original clause had teeth, real teeth. Should any entity listed under Appendix B breach its specified leverage threshold or miss its scheduled payments, immediate protection measures will trigger across all connected entities without need for board approval. It was designed to act like a tourniquet. One subsidiary starts bleeding money, and the system automatically stops the bleeding from spreading to the others. It had saved us. Twice in 2020 when COVID hit, and once in 2022 during the supply chain crisis. Now they'd replaced it with language so weak it wouldn't stop a paper cut. I scrolled down to Appendix B to see which entities were still covered under the new language. Most of the original 28 subsidiaries were still listed, including the newer ones like HW Holdings 57 that had been added during last year's expansion. Then, I cross-referenced the list with the diagnostic report I'd run the night before. The late payment I'd flagged, the one that was 42 days overdue, was from HW Holdings 57. My hands started moving across the keyboard without conscious thought. I pulled up the original 2019 protection protocol from my encrypted archives. The real one, with the real language, signed by legal and approved by the board of directors, complete with digital signatures from everyone who'd agreed it was necessary, including Daniel Morrison himself. The timestamp showed it had never been officially rescinded. No board vote to remove it, no legal review to sunset it, no formal notice that it was being phased out. They'd just deleted it from their presentations and hoped nobody would remember it existed. But I remembered, and I had the original documentation to prove it was still legally active. I sat back in my chair and looked around the office. People hunched over their computers, rushing to meet deadlines, trusting that the systems protecting their jobs and their company were still in place. They had no idea that management had just removed the fire exits and hoped nobody would notice until after the building was already burning. I opened a new document and started typing. Not an angry email or a resignation letter. Something else entirely. A single PowerPoint slide. The title read, Unreported Breach Status, HW Holdings 57 Entity. Below that, Trigger Threshold Exceeded as of December 29th, 2024. And at the bottom, in small but unmistakable text, Original Protection Clause 7.4c remains. Legally active per 2019 board authorization. Full cascade assessment required. I saved the file with a timestamp and uploaded it to the live board presentation portal, the system that automatically syncs across every device in the executive conference room. Then I sat back and waited for 8:57 a.m. The next morning I didn't go into the office. Instead, I drove up to a cabin I'd rented in the Adirondacks for the weekend. 2 hours north of the city, no cell towers, no corporate emails, just mountains and silence. But I brought my laptop. At 8:47 a.m., I logged into the company system from the cabin's kitchen table, still in my pajamas, drinking coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of the burnt sludge from our office machine. My access credentials were still active. Nobody had thought to revoke them. After all, they'd only frozen my salary, not fired me. Just another sign they hadn't really thought this through. I opened the live board presentation portal and confirmed that my slide had synced properly. One additional slide inserted automatically into the Q1 board deck that was about to go live in the executive conference room. Then I sat back and imagined what was happening 120 miles south. The boardroom at Hartwell Financial Group was probably buzzing with the usual pre-meeting energy. Coffee cups being filled, iPads being synced, Daniel Morrison adjusting his tie and rehearsing his opening remarks about sustainable growth trajectories and optimized performance metrics. At exactly 8:57 a.m., according to the audit log, my slide appeared on every screen in that room. The call hadn't even started yet. I could picture the confusion. Someone would have coughed, someone else would have asked, "What's this slide about?" Then the silence as they read it, really read it. Unreported breach status, HW Holdings 57 entity, trigger threshold exceeded as of December 29th, 2024. Original Protection Clause 7.4c remains legally active per 2019 board authorization. And at the bottom, the line that probably made Daniel Morrison's coffee taste like dirt. Full cascade assessment required. My phone started buzzing around 10:15 a.m. I didn't answer it. By 10:30, I had 7 missed calls and 12 emails marked urgent. I still didn't answer. At 10:45, my inbox chimed with an email that made me smile for the first time in weeks. Subject line: clarification and immediate discussion required. No greeting, no small talk, just 8 paragraphs of corporate panic dressed up as professional courtesy. They wanted to connect for immediate discussion regarding recent contractual interpretations. They needed urgent clarification on legacy compliance obligations. They were requesting good faith collaboration on exposure assessment protocols. Translation: we didn't think you'd remember the protection systems you built. We didn't think we'd need you again. But now our lawyers are asking questions we can't answer. And we're realizing we just stepped on a landmine while wearing tap shoes. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I pulled out the original 2019 contract documents and found the section I'd been hoping they'd forgotten about. Section VI-A, subsection 12. In the event of unreported breach discovery tied to executive oversight or concealed liability exposure, all protocol authors of original protection provisions shall be compensated according to Schedule B emergency valuation procedures. Schedule B was the clause that assigned compensation to anyone whose protection systems got triggered after management tried to disable them. It was designed to prevent exactly what had just happened: executives trying to remove safety systems for short-term profit. They'd signed it. All of them, including Daniel Morrison. I copied the relevant section and pasted it into a reply email. Nothing else. No explanation. No demands. Just the legal language they'd agreed to 5 years earlier. Then I added 2 sentences. My banking information remains unchanged. Please confirm timeline for Schedule B compensation processing. I hit send and closed the laptop. The reply came back in less than 20 minutes. We are reviewing Schedule B protocols immediately. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Translation: our legal department just explained how much this is going to cost us, and we're not happy about it. 3 days later, I got a wire transfer notification on my phone. The amount made me sit down hard on the cabin's front steps. $875,000. Not quite the 7-figure payout from my fantasies, but enough to pay off my mortgage, fund both kids' college educations, and take early retirement if I wanted to. More importantly, it was acknowledgement. Official, documented, legally binding acknowledgement that I'd been right and they'd been wrong. A week later, I got a call from Patricia Williams in legal. Rick, I thought you should know that Daniel Morrison is taking an extended leave of absence. The board has asked Elizabeth Harper to assume CFO duties until further notice. I appreciate you letting me know. Also, she continued, there's been some interest from competitors about your availability. Seems word got out about what happened. 3 different firms have called asking if you might be interested in consulting work. After I hung up, I walked out to the cabin's deck and looked out over the frozen lake. The mountains were quiet, but not empty, just peaceful. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Dad, Mom told me about your work situation. You okay? I typed back, more than okay, sweetheart. How's school going? Good. Hey, did you really cost your old company almost $1 million with a single PowerPoint slide? I laughed out loud. Where did you hear that? It's all over LinkedIn. Someone posted about it anonymously, but Mom figured out it was probably you. She says to tell you she's proud of you for standing up for yourself. I stared at that message for a long time. Even after the divorce, even after all the missed dinners and weekend work emergencies, Lisa was proud of me. Maybe I'd been approaching this whole work-life balance thing wrong. Maybe the problem wasn't that I cared too much about my job. Maybe the problem was that I'd been working for people who didn't care about me. I opened my laptop one more time and typed out a simple email to HR. Please accept this as my formal resignation from Hartwell Financial Group, effective immediately. It's been an education. 6 months later, I was sitting in a coffee shop near Northwestern University, waiting for Sarah to finish her psychology seminar. She'd invited me up for the weekend. First time in years, she'd made a point of asking me to visit instead of the other way around. When she finally showed up, she slid into the booth across from me with a grin I hadn't seen since she was 12. So, she said, stealing a sip of my coffee, I've been telling my friends about my dad who took down his entire company with a PowerPoint slide. They think, you're like some kind of corporate superhero. I laughed. I don't know about superhero. More like a guy who finally got tired of being taken for granted. That's exactly what I mean. You stood up for yourself. Mom always said you were too loyal for your own good, but when they crossed the line, you showed them what loyalty actually costs. That evening, I drove down to Jake's baseball game. First time I'd made it to one of his games all season. Hell, first time in 2 years I could attend without checking my phone every 5 minutes for work emergencies. He pitched 7 innings and struck out 12 batters. When he came off the mound after the final out, he looked up in the stands and spotted me. The smile on his face was worth more than that $875,000 payout. After the game, as we walked to the parking lot, he asked, "Dad, are you happier now?" I thought about it. The consulting work was interesting. 3 different firms were competing for my services, and I got to set my own schedule. No more midnight crisis calls, no more being blamed for doing my job too well. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am. For the first time in a long time, I'm working on my own terms." He nodded like that made perfect sense to him. "Good. You deserve better than how they treated you." Driving home that night, I realized something. The revenge had been satisfying. Don't get me wrong, watching Daniel Morrison try to explain to the board why he'd deleted critical protection clauses without legal review had been worth the price of admission. But getting my life back? Having my kids respect me not just for providing for them, but for standing up for myself? Being able to prioritize family over corporate emergencies? That was everything. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at the house I'd been able to keep thanks to that payout. Tomorrow, I had a consultation call with a firm in Boston that wanted to upgrade their entire risk management system. Next week, I was flying to Sarah's campus for her senior thesis presentation. The revenge had been the beginning. But this, having control over my own time, my own choices, my own worth, this was the real victory. I walked inside, made myself a decent cup of coffee for the first time in 15 years, and started planning the rest of my life.